For most of the 20th century, the idea about peak performance was what we now call the 10% brain myth. It's the idea that we're only using a small portion of our brain, say 10%, at any one time, so peak performance, it must be the full brain on overdrive, right? And it turns out we had it absolutely backward. Flow requires all this extra energy for focus. So where does it come from? The brain shuts off non-critical structures. It says, oh, you don't need this right now. I'm gonna turn it off and give you that extra energy for attention. So in flow, we're not actually using more of the brain, we're using less of the brain.
What does it really take to reach your full potential? To use your limited resources of time, energy, and attention to do what you thought was previously impossible. Now, while this topic is typically relegated to science fiction dramas, the truth is actually much simpler than you might imagine. According to author and journalist Steven Kotler, it begins with one word: flow.
It's technically defined as an optimal state of consciousness, where we feel our best and we perform our best. And more colloquially, right, it's any of those moments of rapt attention and total absorption, get so focused on what you're doing that everything else just vanishes.
For Steven, the journey into uncovering the powerful effects of flow on human performance started, out of all places, back in the 90s, when he became fascinated with the rise of action sports.
On the inside, what was so puzzling, first it was the obvious, like more impossible feats got done in a 7 to 8, 9, 10-year period than ever before in history, and it was being done in action sport.
Are you kidding me?
And this was, insane. Rules that had been in place since the beginning of sports, like don't do this or you'll die, were being broken on a daily basis. And you're like, what the hell is going on? Is A. B was action sport athletes. If you go back to the 1990s, this is a punk rock, rowdy, irreverent bunch of people without a lot of natural advantages. They don't have a lot of money, they don't have a lot of education. Most of them came from crappy childhoods, and yet here they are, right, on a semi-regular basis, redefining the limits of what's possible. So that was amazingly fascinating.
And this raises a pretty basic question. What the heck is going on?
And what did he notice about these rebellious few who were putting their lives and limb on the line every day? Moments of rapt attention and absorption into the present moment. Flow. This might not be that surprising to you. It's common knowledge that those who compete in daring and risky sports don't have a whole lot of time to think about what they're doing. Their instincts come in, they lock into the zone, and they just do what they need to do. It's how you hit a 95-mile-per-hour fastball, catch a 100-foot wave, and climb a mountain without any gear. But what Steven found is that the flow state is a much more common human experience than you might think, and it could potentially change everything about your work and life. In fact, the flow state has been observed for much of modern history, from philosophers to psychologists, from Friedrich Nietzsche to Abraham Maslow.
The peak experiences came from many things, many triggers. Once I tried to generalize them as anything that moves, anything that comes close to perfection.
The research into this phenomenon grew over the course of the 20th century until the 1970s, when Mihai Csikszentmihalyi first coined the term.
So many of the people describe this as a spontaneous flow that I call this type of experience the flow experience.
And as Steven took his research from action sports into every other field imaginable, he found something interesting. What enabled these athletes to enter a state of peak performance, shattering records and doing the seemingly impossible, was also true of pretty much everybody performing at a high level in almost every creative discipline, from filmmakers to engineers, designers, and architects. Whenever you see an increase in performance, you almost always see an increased time in flow. And the research into the topic is pretty staggering.
McKinsey did a 10-year study. They found that motivation and productivity can go up 500% in flow, 500%. Creativity, and this is work done at the Flow Research Collective. Some was done at the University of Sydney, some was done at Harvard. We see creativity spike 400 to 700%. Learning, depending on whose numbers you're going by, the Department of Defense did some work. They found learning spikes 230% in flow. Other studies were done where they were taking novice marksmen and training them up to the expert level in 50% less time in flow. Cooperation, collaboration go through the roof. Empathy and ecological awareness, which is your ability to perceive the natural world, go through the roof. And I think most importantly, and we know this really clearly, it's one of the most clearest findings in psychology, in the history of psychology, is the people with the most flow in their lives are the people who score off the charts consistently for overall well-being, life satisfaction, meaning, and happiness. So if forget peak performance, you want life satisfaction, meaning, happiness, well-being, just simple, like I want to enjoy my life, this is the best pathway.
And now here's the most important part to remember. While flow tends to happen naturally when we're performing certain tasks, it is also highly trainable, meaning there are systematic ways in which we can enter a flow state to get all those benefits Stephen just mentioned.
How do you drive focus in the present moment? One of the big ways you do it is you release dopamine, right? Dopamine does a lot of different things in the brain. One of the things it does is it's a focusing drug. And there are 5 different flow triggers that are all dopamine triggers. So risk produces dopamine. Whenever we take a risk, we get dopamine. Dopamine is how the brain fires us up for taking that risk. Whenever we encounter novelty, we get dopamine. Complexity produces dopamine. Unpredictability produces dopamine, and so does pattern recognition, which is the linking of ideas together.
These triggers are what make it possible to quickly and effectively enter a state of flow, which makes it no wonder why those action sport athletes were able to get there. Through each of these gravity-defying tricks, you're seeing multiple neurological strings being pulled, from complexity to unpredictability and risk.
And it's totally individual, right? Shy woman just has to walk across the bar and introduce herself to, the guy she's interested in to pull this trigger, right? Laird Hamilton, he's got to surf 100-foot waves. So it's very, very, very individual.
So before you go out and buy a surfboard, understand that these triggers can be applied in the most simple ways in your daily life. Even the very act of changing your environment could be enough.
Novelty is a really simple one, right? I spend a lot of time reading textbooks these days, which is not the most exciting thing to do. I always go someplace new because I want the novelty, because it's going to produce dopamine, which is going to tighten focus and, hopefully drive me into flow while I'm reading. But one way or another, when you get more dopamine in your system, learning rates go up as a general rule also. So going and doing my homework, basically, the hard stuff I've got to do my job, just in different coffee shops that I would not normally go to, that little bit of novelty is enough.
One key takeaway that I got from my time with Stephen comes down to my own writing process. So a large part of what I do requires writing, and one of the most difficult things to face as a writer is a blank page. The solution? Instead of starting each morning by expecting my brain to be ready to tackle this difficult task, I instead begin by editing something I've already written.
Editing. Oh, this isn't the right word here. This would be a better word. That's pattern recognition. So it's packed with flow triggers and there's less pressure. I'm not facing a blank page. I'm facing the page I wrote yesterday. And every time I'm starting to notice patterns, I'm getting a little bit of dopamine and a little bit of dopamine. And so by the time I get to the blank page, right, when I have to actually start creating out of nothing, I'm already close to there.
Through this one simple change, I've already started to see some impressive results. How you might implement these tactics into your own life might be completely different. So you're going to need to experiment, investigate, try this out for yourself, and see what really works for you. But before you close out of this video, I suggest you scan over those 5 flow triggers again and brainstorm some ways in which they might apply best to your life. Novelty, complexity, unpredictability, pattern recognition. What are some ways that you could use them to creatively prime your brain to enter a state of flow?
It's funny. People don't love them. They're like, oh, novelty. He's telling me to go to a different coffee shop or the challenge skills. Like, they're not sexy at all, right? This is just basic biology. They're really pretty simple, and they're really minimal. And most people don't like them for that reason. They want something fancy. They want the substance. They want the technology. They want the complicated, but it doesn't actually have to be that way. And I like these psychological triggers because they're so minimal.
And as you go off and figure out how to hack your mind to become superhuman, I encourage you to protect your online information to prevent your accounts from getting literally hacked. That's why I'm excited to bring on a new sponsor to this channel, Dashlane. Now, there was a time when I was absolutely careless with my passwords, like when I used the password. But now with Dashlane, I can store all my unique passwords, payments, and personal information, and finally be confident that they're all protected. Install Dashlane on all your devices. After you log in, your usernames and passwords will autofill. Keep your notes and documents secure, and even get monitoring and breach alerts. Go to dashlane.com/Matt to get a 30-day free trial of Dashlane to try it out for yourself and see what you think. If you like it, use the coupon code Matt at checkout for 10% off. If you don't currently have a system to protect all of your passwords as well as your personal data like credit cards, I highly recommend you try Dashlane out. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.